get tender.
Back to the Bernie Thompson Show.
You get close to each other.
It's always a pleasure to be here. I mean, people are nice, so you treat me right, you know.
Maybe you even get close to the truth.
You and Bernie, where the truth will have its day.
The truth is bound to have its day with a guest like we've got tonight. Big thank you to State Representative Mike Hill. I thought he was just so articulate in that last segment. It was outstanding. I learned a lot. And I always learn a lot, too, with our next guest and another Pensacola resident, and it's Ed Flemming, attorney at law, conservative, and another friend of mine. Ed Flemming is with McDonald and Flemming Law Firm. This is a matter that's important to him because he believes in the virtues of this republic. And I've talked to him a little bit about it. Now I'm glad to have him on. Ed Flemming, welcome to the Bernie Thompson Show.
Thank you, Bernie. I really very much enjoyed, as I always do, hearing Representative Hill talk about the issue. He is so well-educated, articulate. One thing you didn't say about him being in the Air Force, he was also an Air Force Academy graduate, which he could certainly take pride in, although, you know, he doesn't wear that on his shirt sleeves, just like he doesn't wear many of his other accomplishments on his shirt sleeves. But
did you know he was
a well-educated, great American?
Did you know he was a boxing champion at the Air Force Academy?
I did know that as well.
Yeah, he sure was.
That, but you have to pry it.
You do.
Have to pry it out of him, and I'll tell you what. You have to be a boxer to stand in the trenches against the onslaught that we're facing right now. And this vote by City Council was just indicative of that. And just like Representative Hill said, it won't stop here. We will be changing the names of half of the streets. We will be tearing down statutes and monuments to the Spanish settlers of Pensacola because the Spanish owned Aztec slaves and the Spanish brought European diseases to Native Americans. We'll be tearing down statutes of Andrew Jackson, who, of course, was one of the governors of the leaders of Pensacola, was a hero in many of the battles around here, but also had his feet of clay and had his bad points to him. He had a very much of a horrible bias against Native Americans. You know, you'd be tearing down statutes of Thomas Jefferson, George Washington. Where does it end? You know, if we're only going to remember those who went before us, who contributed many positive things, only to those who were perfect, we will have no statutes left, not even of Jesus, because the left says, he was imperfect also. This has to stop, and there has to be a stand taken here. And I had rather not be in this fight. I had rather this not be a battle I'd fight, and I'd rather it not be a battle I'd fight because I don't want it to look like I'm a waiver of the Confederate flag. I'm not. You know, the South was on the wrong side of that war. There's no doubt about it. But those poor guys who were called into service for their states, their sovereign governments at the time, and asked to fight against what they deemed to be an invasion from states from the north, and they died in that battle. That's what that monument's about. Just like the German troops who were drafted in Germany to fight against the Allies under Hitler, you know, those poor suckers, they just answered the call of their country, and they were we're going to tear down all the monuments to the German soldiers. But let me take you something that's more at home, and this is not a far-fetched. The Vietnam War was an unpopular war when it was going on. Right. There's a lot of people in this nation, perhaps a majority, who thinks that we were on the wrong side in the Vietnam War, that we should have never been over there, that we committed war atrocities in the war. Let's tear down the wall. Let's tear down the wall honoring the Vietnam veterans who fought and died in that war. Let's remove the helicopter from Memorial Park. Why? Well, because it was a bad war. It was a bad war, and we were on the wrong side. No, those memorials are to honor the poor suckers who died in that war, and that's what that monument does. for the Confederate soldiers who died in that war, who are deemed to be U.S. veterans. By law, they're deemed to be U.S. veterans. This is wrong, and we've got to draw a line here and say, no, not on our watch, not in our territory. And whether it's through lawsuits or whether it's through referendums to reverse the city council method or to recall the members who voted for it, there has to be a stand here. And I am going to be meeting with a group of citizens tomorrow regarding that stand.
Well, I've got a few things for you I'm thinking about, and this is Ed Flemming with us. You and I, our nature, first of all, you and I have been big civil libertarians that's the reason you became a lawyer. You were an investigative journalist in the 70s. And I find, like you say, we don't want to be in this fight because it's ugly and we're being miscast. But here's the thing. We prefer to win hearts and minds through reason, right? And you and I know, as Orwell said in 1984, perhaps people want to be understood even more than loved. And I say that people want to be heard even more than they want to be right. It's one of my foundational beliefs. I came up with that about 5 years ago. So it's hard to have a conversation with those who want to tear it down when they're screaming and yelling and destroying. How do we eventually get to the point where we don't protect our history, we don't protect these things through force or lawsuits, but rather through hearts and minds and reason? How do we get there?
Well, I believe, and I may be wrong, we'll find out during the recall and referendum to rescind this action, but I believe that the overwhelming majority of Pensacola voters are against this action. Now, it so happened that their representatives on city council, all but one, voted for it. Andy Tahar was the only one who opposed it. But I think the people will speak on the referendum, and I think they will reverse the city council action. And I think they will reverse it for the simple reason of saying, no, that's a monument to the Confederate war dead. Those people fought for the state of Florida in a battle that was a war between states. And the people who fought that battle, the overwhelming majority of them, 99% of them, they didn't own slaves. No one asked them whether they supported slavery or not. They were asked to fight for their state with their neighbors and with their colleagues on what they deemed to be a war of invasion by other states. Yeah. They were fighting for their homes, their land, their territory. And, was slavery a wrong cause to fight for? Absolutely it was. But if you and I had existed at that time, I believe firmly you and I would have opposed slavery, vehemently opposed slavery. But I also believe that as 17, 18-year-old boys, young men, that if we were called upon to fight for the units from the state of Florida, we would have heeded that call. I believe that as well.
Well,
I can't speak for you, Bernie, but I think I would have.
The thing is it's easy to point your finger and judge people, a couple centuries ago, but they didn't have our enlightenment. They didn't have the internet. They didn't have all the libraries. All they knew is that their currency was being manipulated by the North. They felt that they were being aggressed upon. They didn't know, and I don't think we should forget these things. This is how we get progress, real progress. Ed, let me ask you this. Ed Flemming with McDonald Fleming Law Firm and a good friend of mine. Representative Mike Hill said in the last hour that he thinks there might be an injunction, some sort of legal action to stop this removal of the Lee Monument. Is there an injunction? Do you know what's going on specifically with that?
I do not. That was news to me, and I am texting Mike to try to find out some details about that lawsuit. I'm exploring both the legal action, the political action. I think the political action will be faster. I'll talk to our superintendent of elections, who's an extremely good superintendent of elections, David Stafford. And I got the number of signatures that would be required on the ballot to initiate a referendum, and it's 4,005. I do not believe that'll be difficult to collect 4,005 signatures among the electorate. And the earliest that could be on the ballot is for the general election. It can't make it for the primaries because primary voting starts Monday. But I believe that will be over. And I believe that's the faster way to get it reversed than a lawsuit would be. But I would be interested in a lawsuit. I know one thing, that I believe that the Sunshine Law was violated through excluding citizens who wanted to appear before council members who were there in person to speak against this. And they were excluded from that at the meeting. I think that is a violation of the Sunshine Law, and I do not believe that that you can say, emergency trumps that, because there was not an emergency that could not have waited until citizens could have appeared in person to have opposed that. An analogy there is trials. You can have a trial by Zoom if all parties agree. Mm-hmm. But if one party says, no, I want to be there in person, the courts will not hold those trials by Zoom. And that's a really good analogy. If they're not going to hold a trial that needs to be a public trial by Zoom without everyone consenting, how can they take a non-emergency action by city council effectively by Zoom for those who wanted to oppose it without violating the open meeting laws? I think that in and of itself will reverse this action legally. But we're going to pursue both. We're going to look at both issues, both the legal challenge as well as the referendum.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you something, Ed.
It will, in my view, be reversed.
I do happen to know a little bit about this. As you know, I attend a lot of city meetings, different city, Florida though. And I'll tell you this, there is a statute, 86.0114, public meetings, reasonable opportunity to be heard. Here's what it says. This is incredible. Members of the public shall be given a reasonable opportunity to be heard on a proposition before a board or commission. The opportunity to be heard need not occur at the same meeting at which the board or commission takes official action on the proposed proposition if the opportunity occurs at a meeting that is during the decision-making process and is within reasonable proximity in time before the meeting at which the board or commission takes the official action. How about that? I will send this to you. I'm sure you can find it with a snap of a finger, but it's 86.0114, Section 2.
I think that alone is reason to reverse the action they took, and I so communicated that to city leaders yesterday, and last night, during this this travesty of a meeting. I am disappointed with our city council. I have requested that the mayor veto it. And I do not want this issue to be an issue that brings Pensacola into a national spotlight with all the left-wing media acting like Pensacola is a redneck hotbed of Confederate flag-waving, barefooted yokos. And that's the way they will portray this. And so that's not good for Pensacola. And I hope that city council will say, this is, we didn't want it. We didn't really need to do this. And if the mayor vetoes it, that they will not override his veto. And that would be the most graceful way out of this horrible, horrible vote last night.
Yeah, and it won't take away the motivated protests that have been, pretty peaceful in Pensacola. Hopefully they stay that way. And you and I are big supporters of protesters, even if we completely disagree. As long as nobody's blocking anybody's liberty to travel, as long as nobody's hurting anybody, you and I are big, big proponents of. Right? You are. I'm sure you are.
That's correct. And Bernie, one good thing about having me involved in this, they can't assail my civil rights record, because I'll put it with anyone else in the country. I was a muckraking journalist on issues of civil rights. I started off in a small community called Statesboro, Georgia, where the city had annexed all around a neighborhood that was inaptly named Whitesville because only black people lived there, that had dirt roads running sewage through the streets. And the city wouldn't incorporate them because they didn't want to provide sewage and and good water. They had well water next to raw sewage. I mean, it was like a third world country inside of the city of Statesboro. And I railed against that as a journalist. I exposed it as a journalist, and finally that area was indeed improved. I was arrested by South Georgia sheriff that you and I have talked about before. I had bricks thrown through my window because I had a black roommate. If somebody does a FOIA request to the FBI, they can find the file of where my black roommate and I made a complaint to the FBI. U.S. Justice Department swooped down, and that landlord was no longer a landlord when the dust cleared. Wow. But my life was in danger when I lived in Statesboro as a result of the position I took that black Americans should be treated with equal protection under the law in every area, and they were not being treated in that manner in the little town of Statesboro in 1974, 1975. So, yeah, you put your record up against my record, guys. Those of you who want to call me a racist because I'm opposing the tearing down of a monument to the Confederate war dead, and I believe my record will be superior to yours.
Yeah, absolutely. It takes it's a long history of standing up for what's right, and that's what gives me a knot in my stomach, Ed. I want police reform. I want fewer confrontations, fewer stops between police and everybody, and especially with black Americans who have the right to travel freely. And that's why I opposed things like seatbelts and mandatory seatbelts and texting laws that everybody was for, because I knew they would bring about these kinds of confrontations that we shouldn't be having. I'm for real police reform. I want harmony. And to see this getting uglier and uglier and accusations cast against each other just because of how we were born, not what we believe, it's ugly, and it hurts me. It really hurts my heart.
Yeah, me too.
Well,
me too. And that's why this is not a battle that I would choose. It's not a battle that I want to fight, but I know what's next.
Yeah.
I mean, I know what's next is Tristan DeLuna and the Andrew Jackson, and if you go back in history, anyone who's from an old Pensacola family, you will find that there is a member of that family, 50% chance, who was a member of the KKK. Is sin carried on from one generation to another through genetics? Gee, I hope not. If your dad was a murderer, are you to be mistreated as a result of that? No.
Blood guilt is not American.
I think Condoleezza Rice had the greatest statement. She said that Thomas Jefferson and George Washington, for example, needed to be judged by the time in which they lived. They were the enlightened people of the 1700s. They were the if you wanted to use that term correctly, the progressive and liberals of the 1700s. They were against monarchy, which was the way of things. They were against a class system, which was the way of things. They had tremendous good points to them and created an incredibly good constitutional democratic republic. Did they have bad things in the context of the age in which they lived? Yeah. Thomas Jefferson owned slaves. We know slavery was abhorrent. It was a horrible institution. But if we're only going to honor the good things of people who had no bad things, we're not going to honor anyone, and we're going to lose our history. And if we lose our history, we've lost a foundation on which we stand. We stand on the shoulders of giants, and those giants included people who had clay feet.
Yeah. And as Mike Hill said, we can't erase history. All we can do is erase the knowledge of it and the understanding of why it happened, so we can continue to be better people.
Right.
Ed Flemming, I appreciate you so much, and I will talk to you soon.
I'm sorry I talk so much, Bernie, but as you could tell, I'm pretty passionate about this issue.
It was important, and we're lucky to have you. Thanks, Ed Flemming. I appreciate it very much. All right, that's going to be it. We're going to sign off. Joe Pags coming up next for the next 3 hours right here.
You're listening to the Bernie Thompson Show. More of you and Bernie straight ahead on Pensacola's only 24-hour information station, FM Talk 103.7, Talk 790 AM.